Hi, it's Rich Tehrani here in the TMC newsroom. Today we're speaking with Hunter Newby, who is the founder of Allied Fiber. Hunter, how are you?
Great, Rich. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. We're glad to have you here. So much has happened since our last video.
Yes.
And I was hoping that we could get some information on the progress that you're making with Allied Fiber.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, a lot has happened. It's been really interesting. Our original interview, the Telecom Talk Show, was shot in June at the Voice Peering Forum, and because of editing time, it came out in December. It's been widely viewed, and in the past several months, I've had a few people come up to me and ask me, when are you going to do another video? Because they want to be able to capture the conversation that we're about to have about the updates, but repeat it to other people without having to repeat it. So it's very good that we're doing this in timely. So
yeah,
thanks
and we've
again.
gotten a lot of great feedback as well.
Yeah,
so
excellent.
I'm always excited to learn more about what's happening in the world of fiber,
Yep.
and I've got so many questions for you. So I guess a good way to probably frame our discussion is to just give the viewers the overview
Sure.
of just some of the big bullet points of what's changed since the last discussion.
Okay. So just to recap a little bit, Allied Fiber is a new dark fiber network. It's essentially a big construction project, but it's broad in scope. It encompasses new creation of duct and the use of some existing duct on railroad right-of-way in conjunction with regeneration co-location facilities along the way that are based on a neutral, open access, non-discriminatory interconnection, multi-tenant model. And those terms that I just used are important as it relates to the broadband stimulus package, which we'll touch on in a second. In addition to the regen facilities, there are also a dimension of cell towers with those. Separate and apart from regen on long haul, there's also the desire for and need for towers at intermediate access points because of the tremendous need for 3G, 4G, and beyond for mobile service providers, as well as microwave backhaul, which is to reach out from those towers and service other towers in the field that don't have fiber. So there's a whole lot of dichotomies going on with whether it's fiber or wireless. There's really an interplay between the two.
What sorts of technologies will be used to communicate with those other towers?
Well, it's important to note that Allied Fiber is strictly physical layer dark fiber lease. We're not lighting it. We're not in the service provider business necessarily at layer 2, 3, or up. So when we talk about the technology of what will be employed, it's really that of the service providers that will lease the dark fiber.
So it's their choice.
Yes. And, WiMAX certainly, LMDS certainly, a lot of different technologies. A lot of different vendors' names have been brought up as it relates to what the carriers or service providers are going to use, whether it's a Dragon Wave or an Avarion or Acadian or whatever, and that's strictly on the wireless backhaul side. Then you've got the mobile service providers themselves and whatever antennas that they use. There's different types of those as well, depending on heights and things, technology that they want to achieve. And then really at the base, at the regen facility itself, is where you're going to have the dense wave division multiplexing equipment that rides on top of the fiber, and then a lot of core Ethernet, I'm sure, for intermediate access from rural networks along the way that want to touch this facility and then get fiber to go to the big carrier hotels and big data centers in the major cities, and or pick up wavelength services or transport services there locally. So it's really interdimensional as it relates to what Allied Fiber is supporting. It isn't just the carrier community either. It's the enterprise community, particularly in our phase 1, which is New York, Chicago, Ashburn. We have a lot of demand from financial traders looking for lower latency, as this will be, the shortest distance available for lease on a dark fiber basis once it's complete.
So there have been articles in the past, if you go back a decade ago, after the dot-com bust and the telecom bust, where writers would say that there's a fiber glut and there just isn't a need for any more fiber. And we know that in the last 3 to 5 years, just the amount of video traffic and the amount of other kinds of multimedia traffic have really ballooned and put stress on the limited supply of fiber that we have. And we also have a challenge where the fiber is not always in the right places. Can you touch on broadly your perspective of what are the needs of this country and the world for fiber in the ground?
Absolutely. Well, it's my view that you can really never get enough fiber. because fiber is the underlying element that supports transport of light on long distances most efficiently for aggregate capacity purposes. But if you just look at the U.S. in the past 10 years, there was a lot of construction in the, around the late 90s, 2000, 2001 time frame. There were a lot of different networks and a couple of different problems with that. First off, they all sort of shared the same routes. They did a lot of co-builds, and there's not a lot of physical diversity and separation. Secondly, the fiber that was put in the ground then is now 10 years old. It's not optimized for the dense wave and the 40 gig and 100 gig that's soon to come out for lambdas. As well, a lot of the facilities that were built were purpose-built by carriers for themselves, at least initially. So their regen facilities, if they had them, were not built and made with the business premise in mind for a multi-tenant open access environment. And that's a limiting factor. In addition, a lot of those networks have since been acquired and merged together. So beyond just the regular M&A business terms, you have certain routes that were taken out of service because the consolidation was better for the bottom line and the balance sheet of the operator. Their operational expense was reduced, but the revenues were higher by virtue of the combination. You combine all of those things, and you start to see that there really may be some fiber on a particular route, but it's not available for lease,
right,
or it's old, or you can't really get access to it because the facilities aren't necessarily there, or there isn't a business model behind the facilities that's conducive to a multi-tenant environment where somebody could come in, place equipment, and just get access to one pair. That wasn't how those routes were really originally set up exactly. Then there's pricing. Of course, a pricing model, the way that we look at infrastructure put in the ground, we want to put the highest count cable possible in the ground because we're just leasing dark fiber. Some of those old legacy cables aren't very high count because that wasn't the initial model. So one could argue, well, with the improvement of technology and more wavelengths per channel, per port, per card, etc., you just put more equipment on the existing fiber and you get more life out of it. That is true to an extent, but then you don't get the updated fiber, you don't get the physical path diversity in most cases. You don't get optimization going forward for all the different multi-tenant purposes, the cost. If a private enterprise wants to build their own long-haul network, they don't want to buy lit services from a carrier, for example. There may be a very good legitimate reason. For example, utility companies, which we'll touch on in a second, they like to build their own networks, etc. So you combine all of those things and you realize that there's really a great opportunity to build new infrastructure here in the United States. And my vision on that, which began a couple years ago, now coincides with the broadband stimulus package, which there's a broad sense, again, overused term of broadband, but very wide range of things that fall under that term. There's broadband wireless, there's DSL, there's cable, and then, there's microwave backhaul, and then there's dense wave division multiplexing. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about broadband. So think of last mile broadband networks as the on-ramps or off-ramps, and think about what Allied Fiber is doing as the interstate highway system.
Right.
That's kind of how the interplay is. And that new fiber with high count, 432s, potentially even 864s, in a multi-duct system with facilities that provide on and on-ramp access so that the rural networks, the wireless networks, the domestic IXCs, ISPs, financial traders, enterprises, education, etc., even the undersea cable community, end-to-end to get through the U.S., connecting Europe to Asia to Latin America. That is who we focus on. And that's wide and, again, to use this term broad, it's broad, but it's essential to enable all of the last mile networks and all the other elements.
So, okay, it sounds like there's a tremendous need for fiber. You said one thing which I'd like you to touch on a little bit more. You said a lot of the fiber's old, and then you went on to say that the fiber counts are low. Is old fiber a problem other than the fact that the counts are low?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, well, old fiber is a problem in certain instances. We can break that up into different factors. Newer types of fiber that are created by the fiber manufacturers, folks like Corning or OFS or whatever, they have better ways of carrying light and different types of fiber, quite frankly. And we're custom building a cable. So we're asking the buyers what type of fiber they want. When did that ever happen? Ever. When did anybody say, hey, you want to buy fiber? Yeah. What kind do you want? And we're polling. And then when we have, the masses say one versus another, we'll be able to pick a vendor and choose a cable type. based upon demand. That doesn't really happen in the cable construction business.
Is there a chance that there'll be multiple types that go through there?
There's a chance that there'll be at least a couple of different flavors of fiber in the same sheath, yes. And that's, again, based upon the application and the desire. Now, older fiber, you don't have necessarily that option, but also you have a type of fiber that may not be optimized for the type of lasers that exist today. But I guess more cases than not, the way that cables were placed in the past aren't necessarily the way that we're putting them in. And so a lot of those were direct burial, or in some cases aerial. And the older the life, the more degradation that the fiber will experience. And then it requires more inline amplifiers to boost the signal. And the more ILAs you have on the cable, the more dB loss you experience. The more dB loss, the more latency. Obviously, the most sensitive of those are the financial traders, the algorithmic traders. They make money swapping commodities and foreign currency, etc. But it does become a problem when you start to talk about broadcast HD and things over IP, video over IP, that are latency sensitive. And the application folks are going to seek service providers that sell them a product that rides over optimized transport, which at its root is updated fiber.
Sure. So broadband stimulus is something we hear so much about these days.
Yep.
And you obviously are a company that enables broadband stimulus funds to be used to enable more people to be connected to the net in rural areas. I'd love to hear your take on what's happening in that market.
There's so much going on right now, and we're really in an interesting period. The NTIA and the RUS, which are the two groups that were set up to distribute funds from the broadband stimulus, which is an aggregate of $7.2 billion, and they've got each their allocations. And then they've both asked the FCC to help them determine the rules. We're in the midst of the rule creation period. Today is what, April 30th?
I believe that's accurate.
I'm losing track of time. I've been down to Washington D.C. so much. Okay, it's April 30th. Thursday, April 30th. We're dating this now for the people that are watching. The comments for NTIA and RUS were due April 13th. So Allied Fiber submitted comments, as did a lot of other folks, and we put ourselves in the position of explaining why we believe that open access, non-discriminatory interconnection, etc., are important to have embodied in policy itself and ultimately the rules that come out for application. Who applies and who gets grants should have to abide by those things. There's different schools of thought and different camps as to why certain people in one area want to protect their embedded asset and their investment, their existing legacy investment. And then as soon as they leave that area, they want open competition and open access. It happens all the time. I understand that. And we're not trying to step on any of those people. We don't want to do a regional network. We don't want to do a metro network. We want to connect all the regional and metro networks. And we want to spur and, like you said, stimulate investment in those networks, but give them something that they can count on to get them from where they are to the next big major interconnection point, where they can buy services, internet access, voice, transport beyond to international points at wholesale rates. That's what's key. You can build a last mile network, which is just fantastic and super fast. But then if your only option is to backhaul from your local central office over the incumbent, the cost for that backhaul chews up all the margin that you made in your last mile business. So, that's sort of where we're at with the comments. That's what we've sort of put into the comments for the NTIA and RUS. Now, they're going to create the rules, and then they have something coming out called the NFOA, Notice of Funds Available. That's supposed to be, I believe, in late May or early June. And then they'll be allocating funds, which should come out, physically grants and loans, in September. And that's the first of 3 components. The second component is the same process, but the funds come out in December. And the third and final phase, the funds come out in September of 2010. So, of course, everybody's trying to get into the first tranche, And again, our view is that's great. We'd like to get started on a very long project, by the way, within the 24-month period, but a long project of building that new information highway interstate system so that people have something to connect to.
Sure. Now, your interstate system sounds like the perfect solution for inexpensive broadband access in rural areas. The question I have is, where exactly is your highway going to be? From where to where? Can you just give us a rough idea, please?
Well, we've got New York to Chicago in Phase 1 through Harrisburg, PA, and then Harrisburg south through Maryland, and a little piece of West Virginia, Jefferson County, into Virginia to a place called Front Royal. And then from Front Royal we'll go, and this is sort of broad, we'll go east. So from the west heading east through Marshall and ultimately Ashburn. New York, Chicago, and Ashburn is a very logical phase one. New York is a tremendous hub of international undersea cables and domestic providers of all sorts, broadcast television, financial. Chicago, the same, financial. It's a meet point sort of halfway to get to the other side of the country for Asia. And Ashburn is, in Virginia, is a tremendous internet hub, and it's world known. So there's a lot of demand for fiber because there's a lot of demand for transport. Then in our second phase, we'll go from Front Royal south through Roanoke, Virginia, and then Knoxville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, Jacksonville, and ultimately Miami. And in the third phase, we're looking at a Chicago route that heads west out to Seattle. And we've got a couple different options on that. This is all very big stuff, trust me, I understand that. But it is critically important on multiple levels that this project gets underway. Multiple levels. If we think back to the 50s and the interstate highway system, and we think back to what that did for commerce, creating one main road, creating a way to get from place to place, state to state, across state lines on an interstate basis. It's very similar to state level, rural or local exchange carriers and an internet, an IXC, an inter-exchange carrier. It's the same sort of concept, the underlying road. That's going to open up commerce. It's going to open up the rural broadband networks, but it's also going to keep the U.S. positioned well internationally for the undersea cables that touch us, that pass from New York to Seattle for Europe to Asia, and New York to Miami for Europe to Latin America. And I'm not forgetting about the Southwest. It's just we have a lot to accomplish here in the near term with the Northeast.
Sure. So basically, you're making the broadband access that many people enjoy today. Even those people will benefit because now the cost is going to come down.
Yes.
Because they
and
don't
the speeds
have to
will
buy
increase.
Okay.
That's critical. You've got an iPhone. You watch video on the iPhone? You ever go to an area where you can't get signal? You can't watch it?
Sure.
Yeah. Think about that. Which way is that pendulum swinging? Is it swinging towards more areas not having coverage or more areas having coverage? It's going towards more having coverage.
Sure.
You can't get that coverage unless there's certain points where you can connect to fiber to get back to the main cities. There's an interplay, again, with wireless, which I believe in wholeheartedly. You're not going to do a whole lot of last mile. Not a lot. There's plenty of fiber to the home, and those are great projects. But the time and cost associated with that versus doing the wireless, microwave, and or just regular 3, 4G, there'll be a mesh there of the technologies and the service providers and who wants to target what market. But they're going to come back to aggregation points. Some of the folks that we've been dealing with, just to touch on that for a second, on the tower side, who are we to decide where the towers go, right? So we've talked to the people in the microwave and mobile business, and they've had their search rings overlaid on top of our route map. And they're telling us where they want the towers to be. Do
they want one near my house by any chance? Because I'd really like one, if that's possible.
Do you live in Connecticut?
Yes.
Sorry, Rich. Not yet.
Okay.
We'll take on New England later.
Hopefully in phase 2 or phase 3, we can talk and maybe overlay my house on.
I'll be sure to include it just for you.
So now you mentioned some of your customers earlier and how and you just said it again about how you're surveying your customers. I'm sure viewers are interested to know what sorts of customers you are running into right now that are showing interest in your kind of product.
Sure. Traditional ISPs, IXCs, financial trading firms, as I mentioned before, very logical ones. The undersea cable community, which isn't that large, but the aggregate traffic that they have is immense because they represent continents. The mobile service providers and them through the wireless and / fiber backhaul providers. And I'll mention, too, back to the NTIA-RUS, they had specific mention of middle mile and backhaul versus last mile. And what does that really mean? So there's last mile, and then middle mile is from the last mile to the backhaul. That would be like a microwave point-to-point shot.
Sure.
And then there's backhaul, which is Allied Fiber, and other people like Allied Fiber that provide that component. So there are a lot of buyers of backhaul service that sell to middle mile providers. Those are just traditional long-haul folks and or regional folks that want to tie their regional networks together over their own glass. So they don't necessarily, they use fiber in one area, they use fiber in another area. Now they want to get fiber to connect it to instead of buying lit transport. It's a migration, it's an evolution. People start at one place and they grow and they evolve, whether by force or by business decision or whatever, and ultimately they need fiber. There's more people today that need fiber than there were clearly 10 years ago. More applications, video, mobile, and particularly the enterprise appetite. We've talked to media and publishing. We've talked to outsource firms, very large companies in the U.S. that do all sorts of network integration, but on an application level. And these aren't traditional carriers, as well as enterprise, clearly, with the government and education. They're non-traditional carriers. They need the fiber for their own internal purposes. They don't resell circuits, if you know what I mean. And I'd say it's probably split at the moment, 50-50. And we've been pre-selling the routes, executing letters of intent. We have several $100 million of LOIs outstanding. We brought in tens of millions of fully executed LOIs just in a handful of weeks. One other group that I'd mentioned, and this is very important, separate and apart from the broadband stimulus, is something called smart grid. Smart grid is about the utility companies managing their operations more efficiently. We've got issues with the grid in the country. We've got issues with power. There's tremendous demand. It's coming from data centers a lot, too. And the utility companies need to manage their interties so that they can deal with brownouts and blackouts and when they need to increase production or decrease production to send power to different places on the grid. They're talking about connecting in a high voltage sense the grids in the Northeast, and particularly in others, maybe in other places, on a new system. And in order to make the grid smart, they need a network that connects all the nodes that regulate and relay data to and from all these different elements. And smart grid isn't specifically about the network elements. It's more about the development of this entire concept.
Sure.
But it comes out of the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy has set aside $4.5 billion for smart grid development. And Allied Fiber is perfectly placed for that.
Sure.
Because we're going to provide fiber as a raw asset.
Right.
And the colo facilities and the towers so that they could build to us and build their inter-exchange relay to then for us to carry those signals on fiber basis along to the other utility companies.
And that's not a tremendous amount of information, though, right? When you're talking about, is it?
It is. It is. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of data.
So of all the lines, I guess, that the utilities have, and just checking on the health of all the lines and sending signals?
Not just the lines, the power plants themselves. The places where power is produced, the generation.
Sure.
And then the distribution. So there's generation, transmission, distribution. So I guess if you had to sort of make analogies of where it's created, and then there's middle mile, and then there's backhaul, and then there's another middle mile, there's a last mile. Power comes to and from homes, is generated in a particular place. And what the Energy Department wants is the U.S. to be more efficient about how it produces, distributes, and consumes. So, Energy Star, you see that, and people talk about that at home, and you should use fluorescent light bulbs and things like that. That's one half of smart grid. That's being more conservative about use and better products for use that aren't as wasteful. But then the other side is the core.
Right.
And that's the big power plants and how they're efficient or not, if they're wasting, or if they should be peak or if they should not be peak. In order to do that effectively, they need to communicate with each other. The machines themselves do, not necessarily the people looking at data from a month ago and trying to extrapolate 30 days out what's going to happen.
Right.
They need to see this information in real time. And some of this has been done on individual case basis in different utility companies' own networks. The problem is that they need to share the data with the others. It's sort of like how the internet works, how internet exchanges work, how routers and ISPs talk to each other at the machine level. They see congestion and they can reroute. They see bottlenecks and they can tell where they need to increase capacity. That sort of same diagnostic level needs to be instituted into the utility infrastructure of the United States.
Now, there are two sectors of the market which you didn't mention, which I might have just missed, but telemedicine seems to be an area where there's more and more interest and some demand, it looks like.
Sure.
And distance learning. I'm wondering are you running into any of those applications that would need your company's services?
Yes, clearly. But I would say, as far as people taking a primary role in procuring fiber, hospitals and universities, and maybe I should take universities out of it because I've got strong relationships with universities from my own past with National Lambda Rail, etc. So they are interested in fiber, but the conversations I've had with them, they're still a bit of ways off. They still use a lot of lit capacity. So, in other words, they're buying from a carrier that would buy from me.
Sure.
They haven't taken that primary position yet. Hospitals, too, I guess they're sort of a step below. Telemedicine is huge, and the video implications, and and the imaging, that's so incredibly powerful, and it's going to need tremendous bandwidth. But I believe that there'll be wavelength buyers for a long time. This new fiber infrastructure enables hundreds of gigs of wavelengths to be created and sold to all these different companies at affordable rates.
Right, so they could effectively go to a company a carrier that's using your services,
right,
and have a more cost-effective solution than maybe what they have today, or maybe
right,
just for the first time have a solution which is cost-effective enough for them to provide a service.
Exactly. And all of this that we're discussing, these sort of verticals as it relates to dark fiber, is the basis of the dark fiber community that we created.
On TMCnet.
Yeah, on TMCnet. The fundamental elements of some entity that wants to build its quote-unquote own network are found in the dark fiber community on TMCnet. The host is Allied Fiber because we're a fiber provider. Not to say that there aren't others in the world, but they do regional, they do metro, and in some cases they do long haul. The elements and the properties are sort of similar. But the dark fiber community isn't a billboard for Allied Fiber. It's a conduit, it's a funnel for all of the layers, or all the neighborhoods, as I refer to it, in the community, starting with dense wave division multiplexing equipment vendors, and then core Ethernet transport equipment vendors, and then wireless backhaul equipment vendors, and then network operations and network management companies that can turnkey the installation and management and 24/7 NOC operations of equipment out in the field for those people that are a little apprehensive. Not a carrier who knows how to do regen and ILAs, but somebody that needs to step up into that role. A group of hospitals, for example, or maybe even the utility companies as a group, or maybe even a consortium of rural networks that operate networks within their state but aren't comfortable with operating fiber on a long-haul basis to get to a major city for an interconnection point because they don't have people in the field. Right. That's where the network management folks come in. And then lastly, and probably one of the most important, is the co-location provider neighborhood. Where do those entities put their equipment in the big cities, the other end of the rainbow, where Allied Fiber's fiber will go? How do they know who they should talk to about getting a cabinet and getting equipment and installation and power, etc.? The dark fiber community provides all of that, plus the ability to set up one-on-one meetings with each of the representatives of the members of that community. So it's just started, and and again, thanks for putting that together and getting it out there to the world.
We're happy to work with you on it, and we should probably tell the viewers that the tabs at the top of TMCnet that say dark fiber are the way you would get to
the link to the community.
And it might even be darkfiber.tmcnet.com, but I'm going out on a limb. I'm assuming that post-production they'll probably throw something right around here at the bottom of the screen, which will have the proper URL. So don't go by Rich Tehrani's memory ever. That's not a good thing.
So, well, I guess that's why we're doing this, right? This is our digital memory forever.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh my God, did you say that right? Yes, I did. Well, the dark fiber community is for people that are just starting to learn that they need fiber, or what fiber is and what it means to them. And this isn't something that today, April 30th, is critical for someone. But in 6 months or in 12 months, it will be. And this video will be alive for them to watch and say, oh, gee, wow, that just hit me. Now I need to go learn about it. And by then the community will fill out, it'll be robust. Hopefully all things come into place and people realize, hey, yeah, I can one-stop shop, a whole network right here. I can go get the glass, I can get the gear, I can get the management, I can get the colo. I'm done. I just met everybody. I've just accomplished all my goals that I thought it was going to take me 3 or 6 months to do. I've lined up everybody. I've got my RFP out. I've got my bids coming back, and I can turn out a network. And for us, because again, we're physical layer, it's a real estate business. Come one, come all. We'll give everybody the same deal, the same fair breaks, the same shot, same pricing. It's very even, very democratic, very republic. And it's good for the infrastructure of the country.
Now, I've got one quick question for you, which is an interesting, I think it's just interesting what's happening. Even though you compete to some degree with some of the incumbent carriers, the wireless arms of those same carriers are extremely interested in doing business with you.
Absolutely. The wireless arms sort of act on their own, and they get what they need when they can get it from their affiliates, and if they can't, they have to go outside. But even a lot of the incumbents, depending on who they are and where they are and what their assets are, we're having conversations with those people as well, because remember, a big part of the play here is physical route diversity. Some of the segments that we're building are new.
Right.
So it behooves them to have a route in a different physical location because it helps them with restoration, and ultimately it helps them with product marketing because they'll be able to tell their clients, yeah, we've got different paths. And we're not trying to compete with them. We're trying to enable them.
Right.
And basically anybody else. You know, it's not meant for the few or the one. It's meant for the many. That's the only way that we can really break free. The only way that applications can be developed is to have the underlying infrastructure that supports it on a cost basis that makes sense for people to create their business and operate it effectively.
That's great. Thank you, Hunter.
Thank you, Rich.
It's been great.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. My name is Rich Tehrani. I'm here in the TMC newsroom with Hunter Newby, who is the founder of Allied Fiber. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.